Okay, well, we're now live.
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. We can get started.
Yes.
Thank you so much, all the team at The Next Web, and to all of our supporters at the Financial Times, and also with, of course, Startup Genome, for which earlier this morning, very early for us here in the United States, we released the Global Startup Ecosystem Report, which is part of an ongoing effort to ensure that our first rule being do no harm, that we focus on what data tells us and what we should be doing in terms of developing our entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. But as I indicated then in my remarks this morning, I think one of the most important opportunities we have at this point in our world's history is to do a better job at engaging government in this effort of helping those that dream, those that take risks, and those that obviously are the doers in our society who are generating jobs and creating new firms. And so it's a great pleasure that Gen Policy, which is part of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, is proud to host today's Startup Nations Policy Dialogue. The Startup Nations community is a community made up of, first of all, ministers from all continents around the world, but also policymakers and staff experts. Sometimes the ministers tell me they're more important than they are because they have a grasp of the details. I've listened to some of them in the earlier sessions today. And this community is all about one thing. They're essentially startup savvy policymakers who are focused on figuring out how can their governments, within all the constraints that governments and public sector institutions face, remove more of the barriers to make it easier for people to start or scale a company. And so this is the reason that in our policy work, we're very focused on engaging the public sector and the leaders in the ecosystem that work with them, the institutional leaders, in figuring out what are the steps that we can take, whether they be regulatory changes, whether they be new programs, and what are the ways that governments can level the playing field. As we saw, we put out the analysis today of 140 entrepreneurial ecosystems, steady ecosystems around the world. We're seeing a massive scaling of nations embracing the dynamic energy of entrepreneurs. But we need to find better ways that we can level the playing field so that it's not all about Silicon Valley, which, for example, the United States still rates #1 on the report. But we are keen to see what lessons can we all learn, can we share, and what can we do together as one global entrepreneurial ecosystem to ensure that our economies flourish. And of course, it's astonishing to me that despite the fact that the coronavirus pandemic was indeed tailor-made for a global response, but somehow we didn't give one. So what we're hoping is that governments will take a different approach when it comes to rebuilding our economies as the pandemic health crisis is tackled one by one with data and experts and smart decision-making. And we hope that because just as viruses, just as national boundaries are porous to viruses, they're also porous to innovation. So we hope that together we will not adopt a very isolated set of approaches as cities and countries, but take a global approach. And so it's in that spirit that the Startup Nations community works together. And I'm very, very proud to say that in this recovery, Jen is hard at work around the clock. This has been one of the busiest times for our organization. We are used to being virtual. We're used to remotely operating, being a global entity, but we've tried to really do what we can. So, for example, we've been providing immediate COVID-19 resources, sharing what governments are doing with governments. We've also launched the multi-million-dollar fund, which we raised millions of dollars to try to give out $10,000 grants with our partner Alice, to be able to shall I say, make the day of some of those folks whose companies have slipped between the stools, slipped between the cracks in terms of getting access to public support during this crisis. But perhaps most importantly, to suit our core competency at Gen, we're doing various things. First of all, with the support of the Kauffman Foundation, we are launching 170 national campaigns to get more citizens in each country to consider the path of entrepreneurship. That is Global Entrepreneurship Week, which will be in November of 2020 this year. And we are also, most importantly, excited to try to unearth more innovations as fast as possible to tackle these crises. And we've launched the Entrepreneurship World Cup, led by the MISC Foundation in support with TGELF. And we are very proud to say we've just topped over 100,000 applications, which, given the struggles we faced in the last 3 months, shows that entrepreneurs are indeed robustly engaging as best they can, at least those that are creating new firms. And so if you're in a country that you're not familiar with the Entrepreneurship World Cup, we're in every single country. We hope that you'll join. We hope that you'll contribute. Your entrepreneurs will contribute their ideas to some of the most pressing challenges. And by the way, there's several $1 million of prizes that have been committed to that. So there's a little incentive there for your startups to give it a shot, in addition to the fact that we have various other opportunities for them by just entering, for example, an online accelerator and other support tools. But today we're going to talk about what we're doing in policy. We've launched our Startup Nation's Atlas of Policies, which is a knowledge portal to try to share among governments what domestic policymakers are doing. And there's a great deal of content that you would have heard in this conference. But one of the things we've not done very recently in Startup Nations is focused on what's happening in the United States. You know, the United States is a very big country. And as you know, we tend to look now in entrepreneurship policy as to how we can be more effective at the local level. Sometimes I feel like the larger the economies, I know India's taken the same strategy, the harder it is for national policymakers to be able to take action fast and quickly as is required in this crisis. And so we're looking at some of the local level challenges and some of the ways that the United States can indeed adopt a new business plan. A new business in a plan for new business, but of course, a new business plan. So we're looking here, we're very honored to have with us Jason Wiens from the Kauffman Foundation. Jason, welcome here. Jason heads up the policy shop at the Kauffman Foundation. He brings a great deal of experience, having worked in the US Senate on these issues, and was very much a vocal advocate in the early days when startups were just getting recognized on Capitol Hill in the United States. And today, Jason and I are going to have a short chat about America's New Business Plan, an initiative that was driven by the Kauffman Foundation. But I know we're going to hear from Jason more about the fact that this initiative is very much one which is all around engaging everyone in this process. So Jason, welcome. Jason, so tell me, let's get started on this. You know, and first of all, anything along the way you want to add outside of America's business plan, new business plan, as to what Kauffman's doing, feel free to add that in. But let's start with the business plan. So why was there a need? I mean, a lot of people who are watching this today feel that you know, America's really probably the most entrepreneurial culture in the world, and that we don't really have too many challenges in making it possible for entrepreneurs to thrive. So do we have a problem? What prompted this? And let us know what happened. What were you up to?
Yeah, perhaps surprisingly to some, the United States for the last at least 20 years has seen stagnant rates of entrepreneurship. And that's despite, you know, the increased attention from both policymakers and from many others across the country in entrepreneurship. What we've also seen in the United States is that a lot of different sectors of our community have not had the same access to entrepreneurial opportunities as others. So we see extra and special barriers that women in America face, people of color, those who live in rural communities. And so while yes, you know, Silicon Valley might rank still #1 in the world in terms of the most robust entrepreneurial ecosystems, and we're grateful to have that innovation and creativity taking place in our country, there are many places in the United States where there are great ideas, ambitious entrepreneurs who are trying to take their ideas and turn them into life, and they keep running up against these challenges. And so we wanted to put forward a plan that the entrepreneur community could rally behind, and that could really guide policymaker action in the United States at the national level, and then as well at the state and local community, because all of these levels of government play an important role in creating a vibrant and robust ecosystem that allows people to find success along the entrepreneurial journey. And that's one of the things I always try and emphasize to policymakers when I talk to them, Jonathan, is that this is a process that people go through. And I think sometimes governments can fall into a trap of, here's a program or a new law that we will put in place to help people at one part of the entrepreneurial journey. And then they say, hey, we've done our thing for entrepreneurs. So we need to take a holistic approach to the issue, and America's New Business Plan tries to do that. And as I said, addresses all levels of government in the United States.
So tell me a little bit more, if you could. So a lot of the report we came out with today, we're doing a lot more detailed analysis that are coming up with recommendations with Startup Genome. We're also doing it with the World Bank. There's many people putting out recommendations. Tell me a little bit more about what differs the America's New Business Plan. I mean, it's another set of policy recommendations. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I'd say that maybe two things perhaps might set America's New Business Plan from other policy documents that are put out to try and guide policymaker action. And the first difference is that we embarked on a months-long and very intensive and intentional process to hear from the entrepreneur community, so that this would be a plan that was really informed by entrepreneurs and for entrepreneurs. For example, we looked at public polling of entrepreneurs. We did informal surveys. We spoke with entrepreneurs at events that the Kauffman Foundation was hosting. We also had in-depth hour-long or longer conversations with successful entrepreneurs and leaders in the entrepreneur community. We had more than 50 of these across the country. And just like a lot of the work that Jen does, we wanted this to be grounded in research and data. And so all of these inputs came together over the course of several months into the content of America's New Business Plan. So I think the in-depth engagement with the entrepreneur community is something that really gives America's New Business Plan its strength. The other thing I would say that sets it apart, if I may, Jonathan, is in addition to focusing on the specific recommendations that we would make for policymakers, we spent an equal amount of time thinking about the narrative. And I think this is important because oftentimes when you are engaging with government, it's not just about here's what you need to do, but there's a case that needs to be made around it. And so we wanted to come up with what we thought was the most compelling case and argument that we could make to frame this issue of entrepreneurship, to elevate its importance, and to increase buy-in and interest from policymakers.
Many of these proposals and plans are developed without any context of how much listening we're doing, how much engaging. You know, often I've seen people do listening tours and then they come back and they develop plans and they roll them out and assume that it's just going to work. But this is a much smarter approach. And indeed, our organization is very proud to be one of the coalition members that are trying to see this, as you say, as an evolutionary process, not just a set of ideas that just gets put forward. Mind you, we do all bow to the Kauffman Foundation as being one of the most thorough institutions in the world in terms of doing its research, collecting its data, and giving truly informed opinions. But I think, as you rightfully say, that's the beginning of the journey. Let's dig into a couple of ideas. So one of the things, you've called for is a more level playing field where policymakers can do away with burdensome regulations and help inspire more people. Can you define, like in the context of the level playing field and this notion that, maybe regulatory issues are unfairly impacting some over others, particularly those new and young firms? Give me an idea of one of the problems that maybe you've identified and perhaps solutions you're looking to try to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, what we've seen over the course of several decades in the United States from all levels really of government is, I think, an increased focus when they act to support business, that those supports are really going to larger and more established businesses. And if you think about this, the larger, more established businesses, they are the ones that have the resources to engage with government on a regular basis, to make government aware of the challenges and issues that they face. And so in some respects, it's not surprising that government would perhaps be more attuned or responsive to the needs of the established business community. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, are often missing in policy conversations. And so that dynamic in itself has contributed to an uneven playing field. We also see in the United States, our national government has a policy, for example, that defines small businesses as those who have fewer than 500 employees. Well, a business with 499 employees is night and day different from a business that has 29 or 19 or 9 employees. And so I think more needs to be done to understand that those smaller businesses do not have the resources with which to navigate government programs. And we saw this in a really, I think, disturbing and sad way just in the last few months here in the United States. One of the responses to the coronavirus crisis was meant to help businesses that had to shut down make it through this very difficult time and to keep people on their payroll. And what we saw, at least in the initial weeks, was that the larger, more established businesses that were still small businesses by the definition were the ones that had the relationships and the know-how to navigate that process and to get the loans through banks, whereas the newer and the smaller businesses were really struggling through that process. So that illustrates hopefully a little bit what we talk about when we say we need a level playing field for businesses, and that is really often a regulatory issue in thinking about how are we treating businesses at different stages in their growth or life cycle.
This is great. I was pleased to see Jen's actually been developing a platform. One of the things that the plan recommends is streamlining the process for starting a business. And it's interesting to us that we developed a platform in conjunction with the United Nations and the State Department, where we would actually put the infrastructure together that would make it a one-stop shop for people who wanted to start a company. Because in a lot of the economies, particularly the developing economies, we discovered that there could be thousands of steps that people would have to go through based upon the fact that the structure was set up for a past era when corporations really, when companies, it was about companies, it wasn't about fostering innovation and this iterative process of testing new ideas. And we launched this program, the Global Enterprise Registration Program, and it's rolling now in a few dozen developing economies. But it's interesting the amount of inquiries we've had from very developed economies, including the French, including cities around the world that have said, you know what, I think our structure actually could do with a very simple blockchain chain, which is what we're using, blockchain-driven single entry system to make it very, very simple. So I think these kinds of streamlining processes is what we've really got to be looking at. So.
Yeah, agree. One of the things we see in entrepreneurship is that an entrepreneur or a new business may often die a death of 1,000 cuts, which means it's not one regulation or rule that presents a hurdle that they can't get over. It's this constant, churn and struggle to navigate these very complicated processes. And when so much else of what we do in our lives has been simplified and streamlined through technology, where you go one place, you enter in a few pieces of information and you're set, we start to expect, and I think rightfully so, that starting a business should not be much different. And government can take a lot of action, as you say, Jonathan. I love the GER initiative to begin to streamline and understand how we simplify those processes.
Yeah, it's interesting because we rolled it out in Iraq, of all places, and it turned out that we had to make up a few of the regulations as we went along because there were gaps, and the Iraqi government said, fantastic, this actually is going to work better. We're going to go with what's in the system and let the statute catch up with the system. So in a way, you can really force a disruptive innovation. Let's move a little bit on to one other area, which, every conversation about entrepreneurship, and I have to admit, I'm always cautious to say we talk too much about capital, but let's have a quick conversation about capital, because I know that America's New Business Plan really tries to get into this notion of getting the right capital in the right hands at the right time. And I noticed, for example, the Kauffman Foundation has this great report. It's probably mirrored on my screen, but it says Access to Capital for Entrepreneurs, Removing Barriers. If you haven't seen this, it's really got a bunch of very new creative ideas. But Jason, can you give me a little bit of a sense of what did you see the sort of biggest challenge for early stage capital? And is there any particular idea? I know there's a lot of ideas in America's New Business Plan, but is there anyone that stands out to you as being an important one to emphasize from the capital front?
I'm glad you mentioned the Kauffman Foundation Capital Report and showed that. Thank you. One of the statistics in that report that really stood out to me, and I think is a headline, is that in the United States, 83% of entrepreneurs do not access bank loans or venture capital when they start their business. So that is a significant gap where the current capital markets are not really working or serving new businesses. So what are people doing in that 83%? If they have any savings, they're relying on savings, they're hitting up their friends and family, they're using credit cards, all these other means that are really, I would say in most cases, less than ideal to try and get that initial seed capital they need to start their business. So that's part of what we talk about when we say, the right kind of capital for all entrepreneurs. The one other thing I'll mention is just, and this is more on the problem that we're trying to solve for, is again, to a point I mentioned at the outset, women, people of color, and rural residents also face, extra barriers when it comes to accessing capital. And so there's a lot that needs to be done. A few ideas that maybe I'll highlight from the plan. One of the things that we recommend is that really at a local level, communities begin to develop their own investment funds, where returns to that fund will be recycled and kept in that one community. We also highlight, the need for government to support new and innovative methods of financing, like revenue-based investing. And then we think there's a role for the national government to, with its vast resources, send money down the levels of government to the states to help incent private investment. The United States did something like this maybe about 12 years ago after the Great Recession. And it leveraged a significant amount of new investment in businesses, but it was a temporary program that's expired now. And so looking at that, taking some lessons learned from that program, which was called the State Small Business Credit Initiative, could provide as a model, I think, to begin to meet these capital needs that are currently unmet.
Yeah, and I think on this front, it's extremely important to note also where the public sector has actually done a pretty good job. I mean, I have been applauding the Angel Capital Association and others and the National Venture Capital Association for their intelligent engagement. We worked very closely, for example, during this period when the government was trying to figure out, how would it treat entrepreneurs and startups during this massive public support post-COVID-19 from the government. But if you look further back, I think the early stage capital community's done a good job at trying to help us understand, for example, how to write crowdfunding rules, but then how to make sure that we refine them as we actually put them in beta in the marketplace. So I think governments can be good listeners in this regard, but we have to get creative. And I think the biggest mistake we see around the world is that governments just come running in with a massive, great fund, and they figure out some way to distribute it. It has to be a lot smarter than that. And the good news is there's a lot of really smart people who can help guide that process. So I think, as is often said, we've got to let the entrepreneurs be the leaders, the rest of us the feeders. And I think if we can work together with public sector leaders, we'll be in good shape.
Yeah, one of the things that we have to our advantage as people who care about entrepreneurship or who perhaps are entrepreneurs themselves is that government, even if they haven't paid as much attention to the issue as they should, they're receptive to learning about it. And once they do learn, I think they do understand, hey, this is important. It's exciting. It's cool to be associated with. It's not in the United States. It's probably one of the few issues that is not partisan. God forbid that it becomes so at some point in the future. And so, yeah, there is, I think, a willing audience, but it takes engagement to begin to move that needle.
Yeah. No, I would like to point out to those people that follow entrepreneurship policy less closely in the United States that, of course, there are some very significant challenges to do with the fact that most of the venture capital, most of the attention that's given goes, to the two coasts. And so when we talk about the United States, the Kauffman Foundation has done a really great job at really focusing our attention and putting the spotlight on these small emerging communities around the United States and trying to make it much more, well, I'll say democratize entrepreneurship, to make it an opportunity for people beyond those who are living in Boston, Austin, and Silicon Valley, that it's really become something that's about Kansas City and Des Moines and Ohio. But if we could just mention briefly, on that note, Jason, tell me a little bit more. A lot of countries, many perceive that a lot of countries have more comprehensive safety nets than we do in the United States. And I know one of the other key areas of this plan was to make sure that we, I guess it's called, support our entrepreneurs, that we make it easier for anyone, anywhere with an idea to pursue it, not just those that don't get hit by those barriers. And so what other, if we want everyone to be able to afford to take that risk, what are some of the other elements of support that the America's New Business Plan came up with that were important after talking to entrepreneurs about what their needs were? I know we often talk about healthcare. It's the big one sitting out there that most, if you look at our colleagues in the Netherlands where this is being beamed from, I think, clearly whether you're going to be able to get some healthcare coverage is less of a factor in your decision as to whether you're going to take a risk starting a company. But tell me more a little bit about what do we need to do? What's the America's New Business Plan suggesting we need to do in terms of mitigating some of that risk for individuals?
Yeah, we highlight 3 areas in America's New Business Plan that we believe would create a more robust safety net that enables entrepreneurial risk-taking. And so we look at, of course, as Jonathan, you mentioned, the issue of healthcare, which has been tied to employment in the United States for many years. We've started to make some changes to that, but there's more that needs to be done to create affordable and accessible forms of healthcare to entrepreneurs. We look at the issue of exploding student loan debt, which has really risen dramatically in the United States. So for millennials and other young people, debt, we believe, may be playing a role in delaying entrepreneurship because people have, these significant weights that they feel like are holding them down. And then the third issue, maybe a little surprising that we heard this as something as significant, but we did, which is the issue of retirement savings. Mm-hmm. A lot of, if you're employed, you're likely to have an offer from your employer for some kind of a matching program or access to 401k or other retirement plans. And entrepreneurs, may not have those same resources. So we provide some recommendations for government in that respect.
Great. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I know we had a couple of comments saying, can you make sure you provide us more specific recommendations to address these challenges? I want to mention that that's one thing that the Kauffman Foundation, and indeed, for example, some of the other partners with this event, like GSCR, we have many, many recommendations. But if you haven't seen this, it's America's New Business Plan. And of course, you can find that by going to the website. You can go to the Kauffman Foundation, or you can go to the Start Us Up Coalition, and I'll let Jason add something more on the end there. But Jason, on that note, let me just see if I could get a final comment from you. What's the response been to this plan? You hope that you would get, rally support behind it. And tell me, what are your goals for the remainder of the year?
Yeah, thank you very much. I put in the chat, for those of you who are curious, you can go to our website, startusupnow.org, where you can view the full plan and see all the details and supporting information. So I encourage you to check that out. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, both from public policymakers that we've had the chance to share the plan with, as well as the entrepreneur community. Jonathan, you mentioned the Start Us Up Coalition, which is a diverse group of organizations that are supporting America's New Business Plan. Thank you, Jen, for your support as a key member of the Start Us Up Coalition. We have now over 170 members of the coalition from all across the United States, and it's growing every week. Our goals really for the year are pretty simple. It's to increase policymakers' understanding and awareness of entrepreneurship and their need to pay attention. The COVID-19 crisis has done a lot of work towards making that true for us. I think policymakers in the United States are paying more attention now than they have been in many years to new and small businesses. And we need now to capitalize on that interest, to engage and to encourage the adoption of new policies that create a better environment, a better economy than the one we left in February, one that's more friendly to the entrepreneurs, more inclusive and more dynamic. And so that's what we want to see happen.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Jason. And I also want to point out that again, our organization was born from the Kauffman Foundation. Great thanks and credit to Kauffman. The foundation continues to keep us laser focused on making sure that we're focusing on the right data, the right approach, and we really appreciate all that the foundation does. And it also supports our creation of a platform we call the Startup Nation's Atlas of Policies. I mentioned it earlier. We nickname it SNAP. In the chat, I see Christina Fernandez, who's our Vice President of Policy at Gen, has added a link to you, so you can check that out. I do want to mention that has been a relatively light touch effort to date, but we're going to be, we plan and aspire to really challenge that at this point, whereas Jason says, maybe one of the, despite all the challenges coming from COVID-19, one of the things that we'd like to really capitalize on as a community is to try to really help take the attention that policymakers have and to really help them make some smart decisions, because resources will be scarce and we need to make sure that we use them wisely, both in terms of attention to regulatory issues as well as in terms of funding for programs. We're all available to take any questions and thoughts from you after this session. We're very happy to have had this Startup Nation's policy dialogue. Well, if you're interested in finding out more about it and participating in more of these conversations, please feel free to get in touch with us at Jen and let us know. And we'll put a web, maybe Christina will put an email address up there for any of you that are interested in learning more information. Finally, thank you, Jason, for doing this, and thanks for all the work you do and for helping share with us today, what some of the focus is in the United States, and making some of us who from outside the United States realize that this is hard work. And it's not all rosy in the U.S., which is something I hear a lot, and that we're in this together, and that I think if we look at this globally, we'll have a better chance at overall success. As they say, all boats rise on an incoming tide. So
yes,
many thanks.
Well, thank you for the conversation. Yes, enjoyed it. Thank you everyone for joining.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.